welcome to Stretford Paddock. It is Wednesday, the 6th of May, and we are here for the paper talk this morning, looking at Timo Werner and his reported... United have reportedly approached Leipzig, Leipzig is Leipzig, isn't it? For the signature of Timo Werner. We're going to get into this one. We're going to have a look if there's any truth in this. We're going to have a look at whether he would suit Manchester United. First of all, in the comments, let me know, do you think Timo Werner would be a good signing for United? Whether there's any truth in it or not, do you think he would be a good addition? He plays as a striker, often plays on the left as well. So bear that in mind. He maybe would be fighting Marcus Rashford for a place. Do we want that? You let me know in the comments. But this is coming. Let's get straight into it. I hope you're all having a great morning. Hope you're having a very good morning, actually, because it's Wednesday. We're halfway through another week. There's all sorts of rumours going around about things restarting, regurgitating, coming back to normal, but not really, is it? But yeah, hope you're all doing very well at home. Hope you're all having a great week so far. But this story is coming from Christian Falk on Twitter of Sport Build. He's saying that our story, Man United and Chelsea have already contacted the agent of Timo Werner. The striker is still waiting for the offer of LFC. So, what are we meant to take from that? Well, United are maybe after a striker. It seems as though this guy, Timo Werner, is very keen on Liverpool. There is a chance that it's his sort of side of things. When a rumour comes out, the three options usually are, it's fake, it was leaked by the approached side, or it was leaked by the approachers. And in this instance, I doubt that United or Chelsea would want it to be out there that we approached a player that we are probably going to be losing to Liverpool. So I would guess that this has come from Timo Werner's side of things. Again, that is a guess, but I like to think it's a semi-educated guess. I've laid out my workings. You've seen my working out. I've put that on the paper, so hopefully I should at least get some marks for that, even if I ain't got the answer right at the end. I don't see why United would have leaked this information, and I would guess that it probably is true, just because 401 right-backs or whatever it was, when United are clearly looking for a striker, and they are looking for a striker, obviously Gareth maybe being one of those options, when United are looking for a striker, they will have had so many names on a list that I'm sure they have approached or sort of gently suggested I wonder what's going on with the availability of this guy and this guy, talking to agents, talking to people. So very much a sort of a soft suggestion that United are interested in him wouldn't surprise me at all, because he's a 24-year-old. He's got 27 goals in 36 games this season. He's a prolific goal scorer. However, which way you want to look at it, I think he's got something like 24 goals in the league off of 17 expected goals as well. So he's outperforming what is expected of him based on cumulative stats from the past. Basically, is how expected goals works. It looks up at chances and positions and weak foot, strong foot, that sort of thing, and gives every individual chance a rating out of one. One being certain for that chance to go in. So if he's expected to have scored 16 goals this season and he scored 24, he is a better player than the people that were used in the modelling for these expected goals, which is obviously a good sign, or something to that effect. So he's obviously a good player. He's a clinical player. There are concerns whether he can play as a number 9 by himself, which is something that we've had with pretty much all of our strikers since Lukaku, or in and around Lukaku. Even Martial, that was said about him for a while. I think he's just starting to take the shackles off of that sort of negative opinion. Rashford, again, same thing was said about him. Moved back out to the left-hand side and looking like one of the best left wingers in the country. But do we need another player that is like that? Do you think that he is just sort of, Werner's side is leaking these names? Chelsea, United have been interested just to get Liverpool to sort of hurry up a little bit. There were reports they had a £50 million buyout clause. Other reports that say that buyout clause ended in May. Other reports saying that that's still going. Other reports saying that never existed in the first place. That's the thing with buyout clauses and contracts. These are all private contracts. And obviously, all the teams or the players will know the details of these things. But a lot of the times, when you see figures and facts and stuff written in the papers, half of those are just made up and guesses and estimates and stuff, because these are private companies trading private assets, and generally they don't release these sort of numbers. Sometimes United will. Sometimes certain clubs do if they're on the stock market. You see it from United occasionally, but even then, there's ways of packaging up assets and transfers and players and all this sort of thing into under sort of different names and grouping them together in ways that you never fully, get the exact details of a transfer and of a fee. So the whole buyout clause thing, I'm not saying he didn't have one, but it's always a little bit harder to know exactly what's going on with that than meets the eye a lot of times. Someone says, was he not going to the bin dippers and not long back? Well, that's the thing. Liverpool are the favourites for him. And like I said, I'll read the tweet again. This is from Christian Falk of Bild Sport in Germany. Just to be clear, Bild and Bild Sport are two different publications. Bild are sort of slightly more reliable, and Bild Sport are a little bit less reliable, a little bit more rumoury. But Christian Falk is someone who you've probably seen him on Twitter at CF Bayern quite a lot, and he seems to be a relatively strong mouthpiece for the sport bill because he's the head of sport there. So, you'd think he'd have some sort of reputation to uphold. He said again, our story, also Manchester United and Chelsea already contacted the agent of Timo Werner. The striker is still waiting for the offer of Liverpool FC. So again, are we just sort of... I think that United maybe have tentatively made approaches for this guy. He's clearly one of the sort of top dozen young strikers in Europe at the moment. And why would we not have approached him? We're clearly after a striker. As much as I like Odion Ighalo, even with him, we've only got two strikers. Do you know what I mean? And as much I love Mason Greenwood, but he's played most of his games off the right this season. He hasn't started up front many games at all this season. Obviously, he'll improve and come in next season, but I think he's going to get plenty of games no matter how many people are in front of him. He's that good. But even with Odion Ighalo, United have got Odion Ighalo, Tony Martial, and that's it in terms of strikers. So I wouldn't even mind keeping Ighalo, great option off the bench. He'll still play plenty of games, and get someone like Timo Werner in, or another striking option. I wouldn't necessarily rule that out myself. Rashford, James, and Werner is like an Olympic relay team. Oh, imagine the speed on them three. That is ridiculous, isn't it? Could we get Nagelsmann and Paul Mitchell as a package for 4 or 5 years down the line with Werner as the first piece? Well, I'm sure we could. I'm sure that is, that's not something that's impossible, but I think Nagelsmann, as much as people like him and as much as I've been impressed with what he's done, I think he needs to win some big trophies at big clubs before he comes to United. I think if the biggest knock on Solskjær was that he's not really done it in other leagues, that's also a knock on Nagelsmann, isn't it? And at least Solskjær is a club legend at United and has won league trophies in Norway. Regardless of what you think of those trophies, he's still won a league with a team that had never won it. Any other news? He's going to Liverpool. There is other news, actually, Graham. Thanks for asking. This is the news coming from... Well, actually, it came from Patrice Evra yesterday, but it also came from Patrice Evra last year. Let's get into this. So this is the story coming from Manchester United. I think it was the United podcast, certainly United's website, that Cristiano Ronaldo had agreed to rejoin Manchester United before Sir Alex Ferguson left, and one of the reasons Sir Alex Ferguson left is a breakdown in this transfer. Also, Gareth Bale was someone else that was seemingly also agreed. Now, this story is obviously it's an old story in terms of this happened 7 years ago or 8 years ago, but it's also a little bit old because for those of you who are Patreon members of Stephen Howson. And I'm not sure if he's mentioned it publicly. He's mentioned it in the office to us before, and he may have mentioned it publicly, but he certainly mentioned it in his Patreon a year ago, this story, that again, had come from a similar source, that Sir Alex Ferguson had basically agreed to get Ronaldo back to the club, it seemed from his conversations, as we saw Evra saying yesterday, from his conversations with Cristiano that he was coming back to United. It had also seemingly been agreed for Gareth Bale to join United as well. This is before he went to Madrid. This isn't. They weren't trying to get them both from Madrid. This is before Bale went to Madrid. And then seemingly a stumbling block was the board's willingness to sanction the signings, the board's willingness to pay this money to get those players. I think Ferguson wanted to win the Champions League again before he retired. And I think in his head, and I mean looking at it now, everyone's head, these two would have been the pieces to do it. I mean, two of the most prolific Champions League winners in history, both of them at Madrid. Imagine those two being at United for 2 or 3 years under the final years of Ferguson. You could have seen a treble, couldn't you? you could have seen a treble. The sort of the standard of play. Ronaldo on the left, Bale on the right, Rooney up front. Oh my God! But what do you think to this story then? Do you? Is there a chance that maybe Evra's got it wrong? Is there a chance that he's sort of reading into things too much, or do you think United were really that close to signing Ronaldo and Bale? And even more disturbingly, do you think that the lack of those signings is one of the reasons that Ferguson said, "I've had enough"? It's a strange story, isn't it? It's one of those where it's just, you saw it a lot with Wenger. It became like a meme almost under Wenger at Arsenal of all of these players who, I almost signed Mbappe. Oh, I almost signed Ronaldinho. Oh, I almost signed Griezmann. I almost signed this, and this. It was a never-ending story of players that Wenger almost signed. But this one does seem as though it's one of those sort of startling kind of stories where you sort of go, fucking hell. Bale would still be at United, certainly. Ronaldo might well still be at United. He may have come back here and retired. I think what the position the club would have been in if we'd have had Bale and Ronaldo for the last 6 years, alongside Paul Pogba, alongside other players coming in and going, and the transition of managers would have been a lot smoother, you would think, with those lads in there. And personally, like I said, I think we would have won the Champions League. I think it would have been the year that Ronaldo played against us and knocked us out under Ferguson. He would have been playing for us, and I think we would have won it that year. So it's quite an interesting story, isn't it? And it's one of those things to look back on. Not much more than a bit of what's the word? Self kind of. I don't know. It's almost like you're flogging your own back a little bit reading stories like this, isn't it? Because it just is another example of where things have gone wrong in the last few years. But really, yeah, kick us when we're down, Joe. Ronaldo and Bale with a treble. It could, honestly, though, would you have been surprised to see it? United had already won United did win the Premier League the following year. We got Van Persie in instead. But imagine having Ronaldo back and Bale playing in the Champions League. I think we would have obviously beaten Real Madrid in that tie if we had have still faced them. If we'd have had Ronaldo instead. And Bale as well. I mean, come on, those two have been just unbelievable in the Champions League of the last few years. Connor Allen saying the board gave up on Ferguson. He wanted CR7 in Bale in 2013. Obviously would have stayed as the manager for longer to see out his last chance at the Champions League. Yeah, I think Fergie wanted 3 Champions Leagues. I think in his mind, that just from interviews you've seen and the way he's spoken about it in the past, I think the one thing that he felt he could have done slightly better as a manager, and again, in everyone's eyes, I'm sure he's the perfect manager. I think he would have wanted that 3rd Champions League. Obviously, would have wanted it, but I think that was the big thing that sort of stuck in him a little bit. The way the emotions and the way he looked and the way everything surrounding that exit in 2013. I think he sort of thought that was my chance, and I really wanted that one. And the way that after strikers is always a big one. The way they went after Shearer, the way they went after. I think Van Nistelrooy he hoped would do more. I mean, Van Nistelrooy was sensational in the Champions League, but I just think Ferguson really wanted to have won 3 Champions Leagues at least at United, because it just separates you a little bit from a few managers who won 2. But obviously, he's still the greatest manager of all time. Bale would have been perfect for us coming straight from Spurs. Yeah, I know. Imagine that. Imagine Ronaldo and Bale joining that 2012 team. Obviously, wouldn't have got Van Persie, but would we have needed him? Someone says. Martin P. Anyway, it would have been some story to tell the kids what other players would we have had now if they'd have come. Yeah, that's a good point. And there is always that, and every club has got those players of, we tried to get them, they didn't join. But mostly, they don't sort of bookend the career of the greatest manager of all time, do they? So I think there is a bit more weight to this one. And also, Ronaldo is arguably the best player of all time, or certainly top 2. Gareth Bale is, arguably the best Welsh player of all time. And obviously, again, if this was one of the sort of the catalysts that Ferguson sort of went, you know what, fuck this. If you're not giving me what I want, I'll win the league and I'll go. Again, we don't know exactly what was in his mind at that time, but I think it is worth mentioning and worth chatting about. Someone saying that Ollie is his first choice without a doubt. Someone said he's a good asset going forward for the club. Whilst Edward is at the helm, there's no chance of a director of football, I'm afraid. Buying into the Ollie rebuild. Would like to see what the next 4 years bring. Yeah, talking about Solskjær there, I think maybe in contrast or in comparison to the sort of Ferguson, board situation then. Looking at it now, it does seem as though there is at least some semblance of unity between Solskjær and the board, and I don't know how sort of paper thin that is and how long that lasts and all that sort of thing. But this idea that United aren't after a director of football because a combination of Solskjær's transfer policy and Mike Phelan's input as well is doing a lot of that job for us. And I think if there's certain things that you can give to Solskjær in even an unbiased someone who doesn't like Solskjær, I think one thing we all have to agree on: his transfer's been great, and the way that he's sort of changed the sort of morale and the feeling around the club back to a little bit more of a kind of this feels like people are happy to be here. We're getting players in who want to be at the club. That almost has a sort of a reminiscent nostalgia to it, the way that it feels at the moment. And I think that that's something that, regardless of what you think to his tactics or his experience or the chances of him winning a Champions League for us down the line is concerned, I think regardless of all of that, you have to say that Solskjær has been brilliant in that regard, making it feel a bit more like Man United again. Again, it's a bit of a cliche, a bit twee, a bit nostalgic, but I think we all sort of know the feeling I'm talking about, and obviously, Chris is sort of alluding to it there. I think we'll challenge next year. The board are getting things right. Bloody hell. We're getting excited here, aren't we, lads? It is possible that they have learned from their mistakes. It is possible. And here's the thing. As much as people don't like Ed Woodward, and I'm no fan of Ed Woodward's particularly, but I think the thing with him is, I think he does want, he's not like some evil villain that doesn't want United to do well. I just think he lets the business side sort of come first sometimes, and I think he just isn't that good at finding players and looking at players, because why would he be? The problem he has is that he implants himself in situations where he shouldn't be there. He shouldn't be negotiating deals. He shouldn't be doing this sort of thing. We should have someone who's an expert. I think that is his biggest weakness is, why are you even doing some of the jobs you're doing? I don't think he wants United to fail. So hopefully, if he sees a formula that is working, and we do seem to have had this upward trajectory in the last few months, and a sort of a galvanising of the squad and the club in a way that I haven't seen since Ferguson left. Hopefully, if Woodward and the board at least see, oh, this is working, let's keep doing something that's working. Hopefully they aren't so deluded, so money hungry, so stupid that they get in the way of something that's working. I think the problem is they aren't experienced enough, they aren't good enough to get things right off their own back. But if you get someone in that's doing a good job, surely they can at least see that the transfers are much better, the atmosphere around the club is a lot better, and we can allow this to sort of grow naturally. Hopefully they at least have that sort of common sense and that kind of willingness for things to work. But again, we'll have to see. Board is clueless, need to sign their players all he wants and let them do his thing and see what happens. Exactly, and Giggs is the greatest Welsh player, of course he is. My mistake. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully they can get out of the way of something that's working. Would be something that I think even the most incompetent, these are clearly smart men, they're just not football people. So surely they can see, actually now's the time to leave it to people who seem to be doing a good job. Hopefully we can at least allow some sort of suggestion that they're at least that competent. Anyway, that's going to be all from me today. We're going to be back this afternoon, hopefully for a debate video. So let us know what you think we should be debating in the comments. Also, hope you all have a good day. Last question from Martin. How would the Newcastle takeover have an effect on the rest of the Premiership? Could they be the next City in a few seasons? Short answer, yes. Of course they could. Get money, get loads of good players in, win some trophies. It's a formula that's as old as football, isn't it? Have money to pay players more money, have money to pay bigger wages, bigger transfer fees. We've seen it with United that just paying more money doesn't always work, but if they stumble across a good manager who implements a good transfer strategy and they buy good players, there's no reason they wouldn't be winning trophies in a few years. You look, I mean, Chelsea came from fuck knows where to win trophies. City came from fuck knows where to win trophies. And Newcastle are, no worse than either of those two clubs. In fact, they've got a bigger ground than City had, and I think a bigger ground than Chelsea had. The only difficulty that those two clubs have is, I would say, Manchester and certainly London is a more enticing prospect for foreign players to live, especially foreign players, just because I think you've heard of London, you've heard of Manchester. I'm not quite sure Newcastle has the same draw when you're trying to get the likes of, Aguero and Ballack and those sorts of players that turn those two teams around. But if they're spending a shitload of money, we've seen it enough to know that why wouldn't they be challenging? I'm not saying they will, but it's certainly possible. Right, Ross, see you, Joe. See you, Ross. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. If you want to become a member, click the join button, click through the memberships. We've got another members-only podcast coming out. We're recording it tonight, so it'll probably be out tomorrow. So make sure you check that one out. Have a good day, everyone. Goodbye.